Russian forces used jets, mortars and rockets to bombard Soledar in an unrelenting assault. Soldar's fall, while unlikely a turning point in the nearly 11-month war, would be a prize for a Kremlin starved of good battlefield news in recent months. It would also offer Russian troops a springboard to conquer other areas of Donetsk province that remain under Ukrainian control, such as the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut. Donetsk and neighboring Luhansk province, which together make up the Donbass region bordering Russia, were Moscow's main stated territorial targets in invading Ukraine, but the fighting has settled mostly into a stalemate. During his short time overseeing the troops in Ukraine, Surovikin was credited with strengthening coordination, reinforcing control and introducing a campaign to knock out Ukraine's public utilities as a pressure tactic. But he also announced a humiliating withdrawal in November from Kherson, the only regional center Russian forces had captured just weeks after the Kremlin illegally annexed the area. His demotion signaled that Russian President Vladimir Putin wasn't fully satisfied with his performance. On the battlefield, a Ukrainian officer, near Soledar, told the Associated Press the pattern is that first the Russians send one or two waves of soldiers, many from the private Russian military contractor Wagner Group, who take heavy casualties as they probe the Ukrainian defenses. Ukraine's military said late Wednesday Russian forces had suffered huge losses in the Soledar fighting. The AP was unable independently to verify either side's claims. Soledar, known for salt mining and processing, has little intrinsic value, but it lies at a strategic point 10 kilometers, 6 miles, north of the city of Bakhmut, which Russian forces want to surround. Taking Bakhmut would disrupt Ukraine's supply lines and open a route for the Russians to press toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, Ukrainian strongholds in Donetsk province. Delivering victory in Soledar and Bakhmut after months of Russian frontline difficulties would help Prigozhin, who has criticized Gerasimov, increase his clout in what has emerged as somewhat of a rivalry with Russia's military leadership. Russian troops have struggled to gain control over Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and another Ukrainian province the Kremlin illegally annexed in September, after incorporating the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. When Russian forces withdrew from Kherson, the battle heated up around Bakhmut. Putin identified the Donbass region as a focus from the war's outset, and Moscow-backed separatists have fought there since 2014. Russia captured almost all of Luhansk during the summer. Donetsk escaped the same fate, and the Russian military subsequently poured manpower and resources around Bakhmut. The fate of a devastated salt mining town in eastern Ukraine hung in the balance Wednesday in one of the bloodiest ground battles of Russia's invasion, while Ukraine's unflagging resistance and other challenges prompted Moscow to shake up its military leadership again. Russian forces using jets, mortars and rockets bombarded Soledar in what a Ukrainian military officer said was an unrelenting assault. Soldar's fall, while unlikely to provide a turning point in the nearly 11-month war, would be a prize for a Kremlin starved of good news from the battlefield in recent months. It would also offer Russian troops a springboard to conquer other areas of Donetsk province that remain under Ukrainian control, such as the nearby strategic city of Bakhmut. Donetsk and neighboring Luhansk province, which together make up the Donbass region bordering Russia, were Moscow's main stated territorial targets in invading Ukraine, but the fighting has stood mostly at a stalemate. During his short time overseeing the troops in Ukraine, Surovikin was credited with strengthening coordination and reinforcing control. But he also announced a withdrawal in November from the Kherson, one of the biggest and most important cities Russian forces had captured during the conflict. His demotion signaled that Russian President Vladimir Putin wasn't fully satisfied with his performance. Soledar, known for salt mining and processing, has little intrinsic value, but it lies at a strategic point 10 kilometers, 6 miles, north of the city of Bakhmut, which Russian forces want to surround. Russian troops have struggled to gain control over Donetsk, Luhansk and two other Ukrainian provinces the Kremlin illegally annexed in September. Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. After Ukrainian forces recaptured the southern city of Kherson in November, the battle heated up around Bakhmut. Putin identified the Donbass region as a focus from the war's outset, and Moscow-backed separatists have fought there since 2014. Russia captured almost all of Luhansk during the summer. Donetsk escaped the same fate, and the Russian military subsequently poured manpower and resources around Bakhmut. An exceptional feature of the fighting near Bakhmut is that some has taken place around entrances to disused salt mine tunnels, which run for some 200 kilometers, 120 miles, according to Western intelligence reports. Russia has stationed more than 10,000 of its soldiers in Belarus and conducts regular military drills in the country, which shares a roughly 1,000-kilometer, 600-mile, border with Ukraine. The Kremlin used Belarus as a staging ground to send troops and missiles into Ukraine when Russia invaded February 24. Concerns have risen that Moscow might pressure Belarus into opening up a new front in Ukraine's west, possibly to target supply routes for Western weapons and other overseas aid that have helped Kyiv's forces sustain a defense and launch a counteroffensive. Polish President Andrzej Duda said his country is willing to send German-made Leopard tanks to help Ukraine as part of a larger international coalition of tank aid. Duda spoke after he and Lithuanian President Gitanas Nausėda met in Lviv with Zelensky, who said Ukraine needs tanks to win the war. In Britain, another staunch Ukraine ally, the spokesman for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said no final decision has been made on whether to send tanks. The UK has been considering whether to provide Challenger 2 battle tanks. The Russian and Ukrainian human rights commissioners agreed to swap more than 40 military prisoners, Turkey's state-run Anadolu agency quoted the Russian official as saying. The two warring parties have exchanged prisoners multiple times, in one of the few areas of cooperation. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said his country has proposed establishing a corridor to bring the wounded to Turkey for treatment. Russian and Ukrainian forces were engaged in intense fighting on Wednesday over the town of Soledar in eastern Ukraine, a stepping stone in Moscow's push to capture the entire Donbas region, with the Russians appearing to have the upper hand. Russia's capture of Soledar, which had a pre-war population of just over 10,000, would be a rare success for Moscow's troops after retreats in the north, northeast and south last year. It is located in Ukraine's Donetsk region, which Moscow unilaterally claimed to have annexed in September despite only occupying part of the area. The capture of the region is widely seen as a Kremlin war objective. The Wagner group of Russian mercenaries has played a prominent role in the offensive, and their head, Yevgeny Prigozhin, would be able to use the capture of the town to burnish his organization's credentials in Russia. Soledar lies less than 10 kilometers 6 miles northeast of the city of Bakhmut, where fighting has raged for months in one of the war's bloodiest battles, dubbed the meat grinder. If Russia is able to capture Soledar, it would likely be able to use that position to intensify its assault on Bakhmut. It could also try to attack Ukraine's rear positions there to encircle the city. Soledar is also home to cavernous salt mines that are owned by state-owned enterprise Artemsil, which dominated the Ukrainian market until it halted production a few months after Russia invaded. The enterprise has produced more than 280 million tons of salt since it was founded in the late 19th century. The mines reach a depth of 200 to 300 meters, 219 to 328 yards, and have tunnels with a combined length of 300 kilometers, 186 miles according to a local tourist website. A U.S. official said last week that Prigozhin was interested in taking control of salt and gypsum from mines near Bakhmut. Prigozhin has himself spoken of Bakhmut's underground cities, saying they can hold troops and tanks. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces reported on January 11 that Russia had lost 112,960 troops in Ukraine since the beginning of its full-scale invasion on February 24. According to the report, Russia has also lost 3,094 tanks, 6,159 armored fighting vehicles, 4,826 vehicles and fuel tanks, 2,078 artillery systems, 437 multiple launch rocket systems, 217 air defense systems, 285 airplanes, 275 helicopters, 1,862 drones, and 17 boats. After widespread failures on Ukraine's battlefield, Russians are increasing cyber attacks on civilian services such as electricity and internet, a new offensive designed to break the will of everyday citizens and turn the tide of the war. More than 2,000 cyber attacks were aimed at Ukrainian organizations in 2022, according to statistics from Ukraine's Computer Emergency Response Team provided to Politico. While more than 300 of these attacks were against the security and defense sector, more than 400 attacks targeted groups impacting civilian life, including organizations in the commercial, energy, financial, telecommunications and software sectors. More than 500 other attacks were aimed at government groups. Attacks have included an unsuccessful effort aimed at an electrical substation that would have disrupted power for millions of Ukrainians, an incident eerily similar to previous successful Russian-linked attacks in 2015 and 2016 that shut off the lights in portions of Ukraine. Those two earlier attacks both took place in the dead of winter, likely to cause maximum discomfort for Ukrainians, a tactic Russia is continuing to pursue during the current colder months. Ukraine may not be the only target. Following the invasion last year, President Joe Biden warned of potential Russian cyber attacks not only on Ukraine, but on the networks of the US and other Ukrainian allies, prompting a nationwide effort to strengthen critical systems. While no successful major Russian cyber attacks on the US in retaliation for assisting Ukraine took place in 2022, the threat remains. Ukraine's military denied on Wednesday that Russian forces had taken control of the eastern town of Soledar, and said the intensity of battles in the area could be compared to fighting in World War II. Serhiy Cherevatiai, spokesperson for the Eastern Military Command, told Ukrainian television that Ukrainian forces had not allowed Russian forces to break through front lines. Russian mercenary group Wagner has said it has taken control of Soledar, a salt mining town near the city of Bakhmut where fighting has also been fierce as Russia tries to capture the entire Donbas region of eastern Ukraine. Reuters was unable to independently verify the situation on the ground in Soledar. Cherevatiai said Russian forces still had a lot of Soviet-era weapons and were using Soviet-era armored vehicles with some modernized elements. Russian President Vladimir Putin has replaced the commander leading his forces in Ukraine just 3 months after he handed him the job. General Valery Gerasimov will take over from Sergei Surovikin, the defense ministry said Wednesday on Telegram, a change that comes as Kyiv warns it is planning a major new offensive after months of battlefield setbacks for Moscow. Surovikin became the first person to be handed sole charge of the campaign in October, and his tenure has been marked by the aerial bombardment of Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, as well as Russia's retreat from the crucial southern city of Kherson. Battles continue to rage around Soledar, a devastated salt mining town that has seen one of the fiercest and costliest recent ground battles of the nearly 11-month war. The area is in the Donetsk province, one of 4 that Putin illegally claimed to have annexed in September, and it is notable for its vast disused mine tunnels. Taking Bakhmut would disrupt Ukrainian supply lines and open a route for Russian forces to press toward Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, key Ukrainian strongholds in Donetsk province. The US has said it would supply Bradley fighting vehicles to the front line. Other countries have made similar pledges. Ukraine will stop Russian aggression and the conflict won't turn into World War III, President Volodymyr Zelensky said as his forces battled to keep control of Soledar and Bakhmut in the eastern Donetsk region. The Kremlin had positioned the most experienced units from the Wagner military contracting company near Soledar, according to Ukrainian Operational Command spokesman Serhiy Cherevatiai. Poland's President Andrzej Duda said his nation has decided to provide Ukraine with a company of Leopard 2 tanks that will become part of delivery from a coalition of countries. Russian troops have not taken control of Soledar despite their claims that the town in the Donetsk region has fallen, analysts at the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War said in a report. Even if Soledar were to be captured, that would not portend an immediate encirclement of Bakhmut, the nearby strategically important city, it added. Ukraine's general staff said on Facebook that Russia has taken heavy losses in its offensive. Ukraine launched 13 airstrikes on Russian strongholds and shot down a Russian Ka-52 helicopter and 2 reconnaissance drones over the past 24-hour period, the general staff added. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu changed the military leadership in Ukraine, appointing Valery Gerasimov, the chief of the general staff, as head of the nation's combined forces. Under Surovikin's command, Russian forces withdrew from Kherson, the only Ukrainian regional center captured by Russia after the February 24 invasion. Russia also unleashed waves of missile attacks targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu appointed Valery Gerasimov, the current chief of the general staff, as head of the nation's combined forces in Ukraine, according to a ministry statement. Sergei Surovikin, who commanded the Russian army in the annexed regions of Ukraine, will become one of his deputies. Ukrainian state-run military-industrial concern Ukroboronprom will produce artillery shells abroad using the capacities of one NATO's member countries. Serial production of an upgraded version of 82mm shells has been launched. Poland decided to provide Ukraine with a company of Leopard 2 tanks that will become part of delivery from a wider coalition of countries, President Duda said at a meeting with Ukrainian and Lithuanian counterparts in Lviv, West Ukraine. Poland is in talks with partners regarding supplies of tanks, and wants more NATO members to understand the importance of such support in the current phase of the war, Duda said. The Ukrainian president discussed the Ukrainian-Belarusian border and the Rivne nuclear power plant, according to a statement on his website. The southern city has come under permanent Russian shelling since November, when it was liberated by the Ukrainian army, with attacks launched from the still-occupied right bank of Dnipro River, city military administration head Helena Lahova said in an online briefing. The strikes since November 20 have destroyed critical infrastructure, educational institutions and hospitals, as well as hundreds of residences, according to Lehova. So far, 65 people have been killed, including a child, she said. One of the city district remains without heating, as it is impossible to repair the local electricity substation due to bombarding, shelling and snipers. Russian forces struggled to cement their control of the small East Ukrainian salt town of Soldar after taking heavy casualties, a day after the leader of the Wagner contract militia said the town was under Russian control. Soldar has symbolic, military, and commercial value for Russia, and if its forces capture the town and its huge salt mines, it would be Moscow's most substantial gain since a series of retreats throughout much of the second half of 2022. Russia's defense ministry said airborne units had cut off Soldar from the north and south, and the Wagner contract militia published pictures of its chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, with fighters inside what appeared to be Soldar's mines. Ukraine's military denied Russian forces had taken control of Soldar, and said the intensity of battles in the area could be compared to fighting in World War II. Russian forces shelled 13 settlements in and around Kharkiv region, largely returned to Ukrainian hands in September and October, the Ukrainian military said. Poland has decided to send Leopard tanks to Ukraine as part of an international coalition, the Polish president said on Wednesday, as Warsaw seeks to play a leading role in reaching a consensus among Western allies on such support. President Volodymyr Zelensky urged NATO on Wednesday to do more than just promise Ukraine its door is open at a July summit, saying Kyiv needs powerful steps as it tries to join the military alliance. The European Union is prepared for a long war in Ukraine and will support Kyiv against Russia's aggression as long as it takes, Sweden's Foreign Minister Tobias Billström, whose country holds the EU's presidency, said on Wednesday. Russia and Ukraine have agreed on an exchange of 40 prisoners of war each, Russian Human Rights Commissioner Tatyana Moskalkova said after meeting her Ukrainian counterpart Dmytro Lubinets in Turkey. Russia said it would resume foreign currency interventions with the sale of yuan, underscoring the growing importance of China's currency in Moscow's efforts to ensure economic stability amid Western sanctions. The Kremlin said it had not yet seen any cases of the price caps on Russian oil imposed by the West last month. President Vladimir Putin said the Russian economy, financial and banking system were stable and would remain so this year. Russia said on Wednesday that it was making progress in military operations around the small salt mining town of Soldar in eastern Ukraine and had positive momentum, but acknowledged suffering heavy casualties. Ukraine said earlier its forces were holding out. The Ukrainian military's morning summary made one mention of Soldar, listing it as one of several towns being shelled in eastern Ukraine's Donetsk region. Soldar lies around 7 kilometers 4 miles northeast of Bakhmut, which Russia has been attempting to capture for months in fierce fighting led by the Wagner mercenary group. Peskov reiterated previous Kremlin statements that President Vladimir Putin remained open to talks on the war in Ukraine, now approaching the end of its 11th month, and that Russia would prefer to achieve its goals by political and diplomatic means. Ukraine and its ally the United States say Putin has shown no sign he is serious about talks, suspecting a ploy by Russia to gain time to regroup after suffering a series of defeats in recent months. Russia and Ukraine will ultimately agree to a negotiated resolution of the war that began after Russia's brutal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, retired U.S. Army General David Petraeus said. Petraeus, who served 37 years in the U.S. military and is a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, spoke Tuesday to a capacity crowd of 700 at the Society of the Four Arts in Palm Beach. He was head of the 101st Airborne in Iraq, head of coalition forces in Iraq, and commander of CENTCOM. Petraeus, 70, is a partner in the global investment firm KKR and chairman of the KKR Global Institute. Eventually, Russian President Vladimir Putin will realize the war is not sustainable on the battlefield, where more than 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, or economically, he said. Russia's economic development is estimated to be set back by a decade, and 1,200 U.S. and other Western nation companies have left Russia or drawn back their operations. It's unlikely Ukraine will be accepted into NATO as other countries probably will not agree to that, Petraeus said. Petraeus praised Ukraine's military prowess and called Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's leadership Churchillian brilliance. While Ukraine deployed drones and spies that located Russian headquarters, petroleum supply points and ammunition depots and took those out, the war is nothing like a technology-based war between two superpowers would be, he said. Petraeus predicts that future wars will include vast numbers of unmanned, algorithmically driven weaponry. Petraeus compared the situation to a circus performer juggling plates spinning on a stick. China is the biggest plate, but others are North Korea, Iran, Islamic extremist groups and cybersecurity threats. Opposed to the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, Petraeus said there were better alternatives such as keeping 3,500 troops on the ground and beefing up the number of drones. He served as commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan. While border security and illegal immigration from Mexico are big political issues, other issues are greater. Mexico is run by criminal empires that are heavily armed and financed and have taken over entire Mexican states. Despite the challenges, Petraeus said he is confident about America's future. The United States will end up being the biggest chip manufacturer as technology that originated in the U.S. comes home, he said.